Yes, mate.
Okay, we are live. Give me just a second. I'm going to send a link to this in the One Leaf Discord real quick. May or may not have completely spaced that. Okay, check audio. Okay, check audio. Max, you want to talk real quick? Okay.
Yes, mate. Howdy.
Max, you want to talk real quick? Okay.
Yes, mate. Howdy.
Max, you want to talk? Okay, cool. We're good to go. Alrighty. So today, so the stream series is taking a little bit of a turn here. So our goal now has changed a little bit. So beforehand, we were trying to just get the fundamentals down, and I feel like we've gotten to that point, and we've done a lot of abstract thinking. So what I'd like to do now is just start doing weekly code along sessions. The videos are probably not going to be like 2 to 3 hours long anymore. It's probably just going to be an hour of you sitting down with me every week, and we're going to code something. So this week, we're going to start diving more and more into ASP.NET. So this week we're going to be taking a look at making our own little API. And I asked for some suggestions in the One Leaf Discord, and the API that we're going to be making is basically a way for you to create and store and update like Dungeons and Dragons character sheets. So I just went and I looked up D&D character sheet, and I found this sheet. So we're basically going to take like all the data that's in here. Well, maybe not all of it, but a good amount of it, and we're going to put it in an API, and we're going to make requests to it so we can show that it works and whatnot. So I'm going to have this on my other monitor, and I'll pull it back on as I'm looking at the things that we'll need. So as usual, we're going to start from scratch so you can see my whole process. So we're going to open up Visual, just so you can see the whole thing, I guess. We're going to start from Visual Studio 2019. I'm going to open that guy up. We're going to create a new project. We're going to click on ASP.NET Core Web Application. And we'll just call it, I think I made a repo for this. C# Basics, D&D, I don't know, we'll just call it D&D API. And I always like to go to my documents folder instead of the default one that they give me. And I didn't clone the repo yet, so let's go ahead and do that. As I'm working, I'm going to take you guys through the process that I would normally do things. So we're going to clone a new repository, and that includes doing all the Git things that I would normally do. So on Git, I just went ahead and created a repository called C# Basics D&D API, and GitHub Desktop can already see that I have it. So we're going to clone it to my documents/coding. And it's just an empty repository right now. And so when we go here, we're going to refresh this guy, and we're just going to create our project inside of that folder. And then when we hit create, it's going to ask us which type of ASP.NET Core web app are we going to make, and we're going to want to make an API. All right, when this is done, in order to prevent issues with the way Git works, we're going to go to Google. We're going to type in ASP.NET git ignore. And I believe I was using this guy. So we're just going to go to raw. And then Control A to copy all, Control C to copy, or Control A to select all, Control C to copy. And we're just going to open up Notepad++. And you can see I already have an example of this, but we're going to make a new document using Control N. We'll paste in our new git ignore. We will save. Go inside of our API, and this folder or this file will just be called .gitignore. For those of you that are unaware, basically what this does is it says anything that ends with .suo or .user or .sln, we don't want Git to handle that, right? Like, for example, a build folder. We don't care about build folders. We just want to make sure that we only get the files that are actually changing the code. Because, if I'm going to build the project on my machine, I don't care to pull down the actual build files. That'll make it take longer when we're updating things. So you can see now we had like a ton of files when the project was created. Now we just have the core ones. So I'm going to go ahead, and we're just going to do things on master branch. This isn't how you should do it, but since this is just a sample project, we're just going to be using this for tracking our changes. So I'm just going to create a commit called, or saying that we created the initial project. And the reason I'm doing small commits like this is so that if I mess something up, we can just go revert that commit. Okay. Okay, so this is kind of your overview page. It will give you links to the documentation, how to publish your app, and all that jazz. You can go to connected services to talk about, like connecting to different cloud services and all that jazz. We're not going to worry about any of that. We're just going to actually make the API and test it locally. So if you look over here in the Solution Explorer, if you don't have this pulled up, you may be on LiveShare or Team Explorer or whatnot. Just click down here. Otherwise, you can go into View and find it in here. Okay, so what does it come with? If you look in dependencies and frameworks, you can see we get ASP.NET Core App and Net Core App. Under properties, we can go to launch settings. And we'll double click on that guy. So basically what this has is, like if we want to run it, we have a couple options. We can run like the actual app itself, or we can run it on IIS Express. IIS is, it's like Internet Information Services, and basically what it means is it runs on a quote-unquote Windows server on your machine. Like if you hit Windows and type in IIS, depending on if you have it enabled, I do not, you can go look at like IIS settings. We don't care about that. So we're gonna delete this guy from our settings, and we're gonna get rid of the IIS Express profile. We are also going to delete this extra application URL because it can either start up on localhost port 5001 or localhost port 5000. I want it to start on the same one every time, no matter what. And we also want to rename the launch URL. Actually, we're not going to launch to URL, so we're going to change launch browser to false. Otherwise, if I leave it to true, what will happen is when I hit run, it'll open up a browser tab trying to hit the API, and we don't care about that. We're going to use Postman. So when it runs, it'll give you a little bit of logging, and then it opens up this for me, and you can see it's already spitting out API data, right? It's just JSON. And you can see we're just hitting localhost 5000, and we're hitting /weather forecast. And it's it's printing out like the date of the weather forecast, the temperature in Celsius, Fahrenheit, and the summary. We're going to strip all this out, but I just wanted you guys to see how it's working. Okay. So now you can see we don't have that IIS option anymore. It's running now on what's called Kestrel, which is a cross-platform web service engine. Okay, so what all do we have in the project so far? We have program is where everything's going to come from, right? So this is our like we've been looking at console applications, so we've always had a main function. This is the very first line that executes when we hit run. So what does it do? It does a bunch of complicated crap, and to get running, you can see that everything's already set up for you. Like it's already spitting out API data, right? So we can just step through this and look at how these things are set up. So it's going to create a host builder. A host builder is just like acting as a web host, right? And it's going to take in whatever arguments you have. We don't have any, and it's going to build that host builder and then run it. So you can see down here the function that it's calling, right? So what it's doing is it's saying grab the host from the Microsoft extension, right? Create the default builder, and then configure the web host defaults, which is a bunch of stuff that you don't have to worry about under the hood unless you're going to be doing something more specific. But we're not going to worry about that, right? And then it uses dependency injection. We haven't really talked about that yet. It's a topic that might be best served by doing some YouTube tutorials looking at how dependency injection works. But basically what it does is then, as the host builder is being ran, it uses the startup class. It's not like creating a new class startup and then, calling the start method on it or whatever. It's using a dependency injection to dynamically do these things at runtime. So we can go to the startup C# script because that's what's going to happen. So the constructor is going to get called. It's going to be passed in a configuration. And you can go look at like what a configuration would have. If you just hit F12 on it, you can see it has the capability of getting the children in its configuration, its reload token, and so on. So the configuration would be here. So you can see we have a logging configuration, like its children would be like log level, and log level's children would be default, and so on. So yeah, we're just using the very very default level configuration. So then when it gets started up and things start getting rolled out, we use dependency injection to add the controllers. So you can see our controller folder over here has a controller to control weather forecast requests. We'll get to that in a second. And then when we configure, we ask if our environment is in development. So you can have environment variables that when you start your application, depending on if you're like on your home machine, right? If you're just working on it at home, or if you deploy it out to like Amazon Web Services or Azure or something, you could just change build flags so that way things could change depending on how things work. So in this case, we have like a developer exception page that will spit out actual errors, whereas on a production level um, web service, you'd want to have like a 404 displayed saying I couldn't find the page. So default to the way the application was created, it tells we're going to, if we're in development, we're going to use their exception page. We're going to use HTTPS redirection, right? So if you try and send an HTTP request, it'll automatically say, hey, no, you should really be using HTTPS so that your requests are encrypted. We're going to be using routing, right? So this will it adds middleware, which is basically it's it's in the middle. It's software in the middle of your request and the server telling it how it should be handled, right? So if you make a request, it should use the routing to figure out which method to call when you send a request. We're also telling it that it can use authorization. We're not actually going to make use of this, but authorization would be used to like say you have to have an API key or something. And then we're going to tell it to use endpoints, right? And that'll map the controllers using dependency injection yet again to um, figure out which controllers go to which routes. So okay, so let's go look at the basics. So we have what it gives us is a weather forecast model, and you can just see based off of if we hit run again. Let me open up this page. You can see the model has a date, a temperature in Celsius, a temperature in Fahrenheit, and a summary. And you can see it's spitting out a date, a temperature in Celsius, a temperature in Fahrenheit, and a summary. And that's just doing that in an array of them. So it's spitting out just multiple weather forecasts. So this is our data model. This is the thing that we're going to be interacting with, right? Well, how do you interact with it? You interact with it in a controller. So the controller that they have set up, it's in the namespace of controllers, right? Because this is going to be in the controller's namespace. It has some attributes that tell it that basically tell the ASP.NET how to integrate these things. So you can tell it that it's a API controller, and its route being, if we go back to here, you can see its route is /weather forecast, like its URL that you want to hit is /weather forecast, right? And you can see it's just in brackets controller, and basically what it does is it takes the words before controller, like it automatically does this for you. It takes the words before controller and changes it to weather forecast, right? Or in this case, weather forecast, right? It's all lowercase because it's in the URL. So you can see they do, like when you do a GET request, we looked at those in Postman, either last stream or the one before. And so a GET request, if you hit it from a browser, it's going to be doing a GET request. Like you can open up, you can use Control-Shift-I to open up the developer console, and if you refresh the page, you can see under the network tab, I'm dumb and I didn't rerun it. You can see down here we made a request. And you can see the headers, we made a GET request, right? And then it returned a status code of OK. And you can see, remember how we took out IIS? You can see the server that we're running on is Kestrel, right? Okay, so then you can see the response that they sent us is it's just JSON data, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to rip all this out and make it super simple to work with. Okay, so we're going to delete this guy, and we're going to delete this guy. Okay, so now if we hit run, nothing will happen, or nothing will be output, right? Like if we try and hit run. It'll say, oh, you're trying to go to weather forecast, but it doesn't exist, right? Because we deleted everything. So what we want to do is we want to change the launch settings, right? Okay, the launch URL that it's going to try and go to is weather forecast, but we don't even want to start on a browser, right? We don't even care about opening up a browser, so we're going to change that to false. So now when we hit run, Google Chrome won't come up and give us a page, right? Or whatever your default browser is. It'll just run the API. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create a new folder. So we're going to click on our solution. We're going to hit add new folder, and we're going to call it models. So the weather forecast that we originally saw was a model, but it wasn't in a folder. I like to keep things clean and put them in folders. So we're going to create a model called character. I can type. I can spell, I promise. Okay, so we're going to create a model called character. And if we just go look at the like a D&D page that we can just start really simple with character name, and then we can add in the rest of the properties later. So to have this make a little bit more sense, what we want to do is we want to, if you're ever storing things in a database, you want things to have an ID. And an ID is basically like a unique value that lets the database know that this thing, it's a unique reference for the database to be able to grab a value, right? So like if you create one character, its ID will be 1. If you create another character, its ID will be 2, and so on and so on. So everything has a unique value, so that way, you have a way of grabbing the record. And then we'll just give it, I'll make it a name. And by making them public and giving them a get set, which makes them a property, this allows the API architecture to pick up on that and automatically handle this class and serialize it, right? So we don't have to do that JSON serialization stuff that we did a couple streams ago. So now that we have our model, what we want to do is we want to add a database context. So the database context is basically the class that coordinates the data model and integrates it with the entity framework, which is how ASP.NET works with the database, right? So we're going to go to Tools. We're going to go to the Nuget Package Manager. And then we're going to go to Manage Nuget Packages. So Nuget, which is a name off, or a funny pun off of the candy, it is the package manager for C# projects. Which basically means that you can import libraries and whatnot, right? And it'll handle it under your dependency tree, right? So we're going to go to Browse, and we're going to import 2 different packages here. We're going to grab, so you can just put under Browse, I have the Microsoft Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. And so this is, you can read it. It basically says it's the database provider for the Entity Framework Core. So Entity Framework is basically what maps this thing to a table in a database, right? So like if we were to look at a database, it would have 2 columns, an ID and a name. Well, the Entity Framework handles all of that stuff for us, which is beautiful. So we're going to click on this guy, we're going to select project so it selects both boxes, and we're going to hit install. We're going to accept the licenses, right? Agreeing that, whatever their licenses say. We're not going to worry about that right now, but if you want to go read into their licenses. If you're doing this for any sort of commercial project, I'd recommend reading into those. Okay, so you can see it's installed. It has a little green arrow. And the next one that we're going to grab is, instead of doing things on SQL Server, we're going to just do it in memory for our project. But I wanted to show you how to grab the SQL Server one. In memory basically means when we start the server, it's just going to hold it in our RAM, right? And when the program ends, everything that was in our API is going to disappear. And when we restart the program, if we add things to it, it'll put it back in there, right? So those are basically your 2 ways of managing things. I like to do things in memory to start, right? Because it's super easy to work with, and I don't have to work with any SQL stuff. But once you have any sort of production level project, you want to deal with SQL, because SQL is going to be your database that, if your application shuts off or if your server crashes, your data is still going to be stored somewhere, right? But we don't care about that yet. Okay, so now we're going to add a context for our model. So we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call it character context. And this guy is going to be super simple. He's going to be a database context, right? So basically what this guy is going to do is be the context in which the database and entity framework knows how to work with each other, right? It will let the SQL server and the model that we've created be able to interact. So we're going to put in DB context here, and it's going to say, oh no, we don't exist, but we imported that, so we can use the entity framework, right, to grab that DB context. And now we're going to create a constructor for our context. And this is going to take in DB context options. And what are the context options for? They're for our character context. This is since this is using generics. And we're just going to call it options. And then we're going to tell it that it can call the base class method, passing in the options. And that's all we need here. This is just a constructor that allows the context to be constructed and pass it. So base options just passes these options to its parent, which is DB context, right? And it'll call its constructor. If we can go look at that if you want. So you can see it initializes a new instance of the DB context class using whatever options you pass in. We're not passing in any, obviously. Or we're passing in ones that are generated for us by the entity framework. Okay, and then the last thing we need is we need a way to set, right? So you can see a DB set can be used to query and save instances of whatever entity that you're going to be working with. In this case, our entity that we're going to be working with is character. And we'll just call it characters. And it needs a get set, my bad. Okay, so I know this is going to be more higher level stuff until we get to how it actually works, and it'll make a lot more sense, I promise. Okay, so now that we have the context, we have to register it with our services, right? So we have to go to startup, and where we configure our services, we're adding the controllers, but we're not adding the database context, right? Like the ASP.NET Core doesn't know how to deal with that context yet. So what we have to do is we have to say, hey, Mr. Services, Dependency Injection, I want you to add a database context. And the context that I want you to use is our character context that we made. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in OPT, which is for options, right? We could just call it options, actually. That'll be a little bit cleaner. And we're going to say the options that we want to use are to use an in-memory database. And what do we want to call that database? It doesn't matter. We can just call it characters. Oh, look. See, we're getting used to lambdas, guys. I'm happy. See, this is why I somewhat am going to take credit for happily planning this out as we, because like I had to think ahead of like all the things that we were going to do, and so like I'm very happy that we went so in depth into lambdas, so you aren't like, what in the world is this syntax? Okay, so now I'm actually going to tab this over so it looks a bit more clean. So now we know that we have a database, and then the database name doesn't really matter, right? It's just some way to refer to it in memory. But whenever the application starts up, it's going to create a quote-unquote database in memory, right? So it's not going to be like on our hard drive, it's going to be in RAM, right? So if the program stops, RAM's going to be emptied, right? And you see how we have all these extra imports? I don't want them, so you can hit Control-R and then Control-G, and it'll clean them all up. Okay, so we added our database context to the dependency injection container, and then we said we're going to use an in-memory database. So now we need to make a controller. So this is super cool that ASP handles this stuff for us. So we can go to add, and we're going to say we want to make a new scaffolded item. Scaffolded meaning like, there's scaffolding for us, right? The scaffolding that we're going to use is the model and context that we made. So we're going to choose the add API controller with actions using the entity framework. And when we hit add, it's going to say, okay, what do you want to use for your scaffold? Well, for our model, we want to use character. And for the data context, we're going to use the character context. And when we hit add, it's going to generate an API controller for us that will do getting, setting, putting, posting, and deleting. And you can see it's already updating dependencies and whatnot for us. While this is loading, you guys got any questions?
Just
This is
one.
taking a long time. Sorry.
No, you're good. The only question I have is what's the difference between MVC and API? Because I know with my API on the side, went with MVC instead. Does it even matter?
So when you do an API, it'll give you like these attributes, right?
Right.
So like you'll have a route for it, and then you'll say it's an API controller, so it maps when you try and like. So in MVC, you're returning a view, whereas in here we're returning data, right? So we're returning
True.
an
Yep.
action result, right?
Yep.
Whereas in
That's right.
in MVC you're returning a view. So the only difference between an API and a web app is instead of returning a view or HTML, you're returning data, right? So let's think
Right.
about like if you're making a JavaScript front end for a project, you may make all the HTML in your project, and then let's say you're making, I don't know, a projects or I don't know, you're making a notes app, right? So you have like your header, you have your footer, that's all in your front end. You don't have to get returned to that view. All you want to get returned is your list of notes, and then the front end can format them and whatnot, right? So you could just use an API in that case. And that's kind of the cool part about backend is that with one backend serving up the data, you can have any number of front ends handling it for you, right? Okay, so what did that generator do for us? You can see under controllers, it gave us the characters controller. It generated all this code for me, right? I didn't have to write any of this, which is super cool. So our route is API slash and then the name of the controller, right? It's going to be auto completed when it runs, so it's going to be API slash characters. This guy is an API controller. If we hover over it, it says that this is a type derived that are used to serve API responses, right? So it's not used to serve views, it's used to serve like JSON data, right? So we have our context, right? And we never talked about this read-only access modifier. Basically, it means it's read-only. You can't set it. The dependency injection is going to handle it for us, right? Like it's going to be set in the constructor, and then you can't change it after that. Okay, so it gave us some default stuff. So it's going to have attributes, right? So we can make a GET request to API slash characters. It even added the comments for it, which is nice. So you can make a GET request, and you can see the name of the function is called GET characters. And it's going to return, and it's going to await. Remember when we talked about async? It's going to await for the context to find the characters and turn it to a list and return it asynchronously. So this is just going to reach into our database and pull out all the characters. And whenever that's done, it's going to rip off the task, and then it'll be an action result, which is an IEnumerable, which is just a list, right? Or something that can be iterated over. And then it's just going to be so basically what this is returning is a list of characters, right? And then so you can just get all of the characters, or you can get characters by their ID, right? So you can see hp.get, and then you can pass in an ID, right? Like this variable will be passed in as a parameter to the function. So let's start out with the basics here. Let's close everything and make this very simple on us. The only things that we want to worry about right now are get and post. We want to be able to post something or put it on the database, and we want to be able to get something once it's up there, right? So how does post look? You say API slash characters. So if you don't have this tool yet, it's called Postman. It's just something that you can use to interact with APIs. It makes it really easy. If you're on Linux, you can use a tool. You can use command line tools like curl or wget. But Postman is a nice GUI. So I'm going to make a new collection in here, and we're going to call it I don't know, D&D API. And a collection just holds a collection of requests, right? Okay, so we're going to right-click on that collection and create it and add a request, and we're going to call it post character to create a character, right? And then we're going to have another request called get character. Characters plural, because we'll do that first. So to post a character, where do we want to do, instead of a get request, we want to do a post request. And into the URL, we want to put where we're supposed to go, which is https://localhost 5000. And I'm just going to copy the one that I was using on a different project. And then instead of note, it's going to be, you can see on the API actually, it said /API/characters, so we can copy that guy. Okay, so we're going to make a post to API/characters, right? So, but what do we want to post? Well, in the body of our HTTP request, we want to post some JSON. So we'll go to raw, and we will write out some raw JSON. And what do we want to put into raw? We want to put in the, what did we call the variable name? Did we just call it name? Yeah, name. So we're going to say the name of our character is going to be, I don't know, Alex. Where did I get that idea? Okay, so when we hit send, it should yell at us. Aha, we're not getting any response because the server isn't running. Okay. So we go back to Postman, and when we make the request now, it says, no dice. What did I do wrong? I'm forgetting a step. What am I forgetting? We added the model. We added the database context. We registered the database context. Aha, there we go. Okay. So when I tried to do HTTPS, you're supposed to, when you're first getting started, you're supposed to go to settings and disable the Ssl Certificate Verification, which basically means don't use HTTPS. So we can just use HTTP, and remember, because we added that HTTPS, because it has the Solution Explorer startup. Because it has the redirection, it will automatically redirect to HTTPS for us. So we don't worry about verifying their certificate because that's not something that we're worried about yet. Okay, so if I get rid of that HTTPS and I hit send, now we get an error, right? And so this is what the API is returning us, right? And this is built into the way the API works. And it says the title is, it says it's an unsupported media type, and the status code is 415. We could just like go to Google and we could say HTTP 415. And you can go to like the Mozilla Developer Network, and it'll say status code 415 says it's an unsupported media type. What does it mean by unsupported media type? Whatever we're sending it, the server doesn't support. The problem is we need to send it in the headers, the content type of the data. So you can send content type, and the content type we want to send is application/JSON, right? Because we're sending them JSON data, and we need to tell the server that's what we're sending it. So now when we hit send, boom, it prints out the thing that we made, and you can see it generated an ID for us, right? In our body, we just gave it a name, and the entity framework automatically generated this thing in our database and gave it an ID, right? So if we go to our GET request now, we'll copy the same URL. When we hit send, you can see the only difference between the post and the GET was that this guy is wrapped in brackets because it's assuming that it's a list, right? Whereas if we add a /1, because you can see that we can pass in an ID, right? You could say API/characters/whatever the character's ID is. It's not going to be wrapped in those brackets because it's not a list. It's returning one character, right? Okay, so what we could do is we could post another character, and we can call him Max, and we can hit send. And you can see it gives us ID 2, and then we can add another one called Sabian, and hit send, and it gave us ID 3. And now when we do get characters, boom, it returns us a list with Alex having an ID of 1, Max having an ID of 2, and Sabian having an ID of 3. And I could add /2 to get Max, right, because he has ID 2. And I hit send, and it'll give me him. Okay. This is the very basics of a good functioning API. Like this is how the data should be formatted. This is how the URL should be formatted. You know, maybe it shouldn't have /API in front of it, or maybe it should have, you know, /API/ the version number in front of it. But I think this overall is a very good standard of how an API should function. This is very intuitive once you understand how it works. So what happens when I make a GET request? We talked about that, right? Or sorry, we made a GET request for all of the characters, right? It just grabs all the characters and turns them to a list, right? So that automatically handled turning it to a list and returning it as JSON. To get a single character, we can do the context to grab the characters out of it and find them asynchronously by ID, because we pass in an ID. If the character's null, you return a not found exception, right? So we could pass in, I don't know, 234 and hit send, and it would give us a not found exception. You know, when you go to a page and like, you know, maybe you click on a link and it's not there, you get a 404 error. This is why. The standard out there for web applications is if you can't find the page or you know, maybe you're clicking on a picture, if you can't find the page or a resource, return a 404 error. And that's what our API does for us, right? It returns a not found, which is, you know, just built in, right? You can see it creates a not found result that produces a status code 404. Otherwise, if we did find our character, return him. Okay. I know we've done a lot. We're going to go through the rest of the methods, but now that we're here, what questions do you have, guys?
Nothing really. Just if you're doing a post request, can you override the ID, like put your own ID in?
So post is to make a new one. Put is to overwrite. You can see you have to give it an
Sorry,
ID
sorry.
to overwrite it. But we can do that, yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I just want to make sure you guys
I always
understand
get
get
them
and post.
confused, to be honest. They kind of sound the same. Don't they?
They
Post.
do. So just so you guys we're all on the same page here. HTTP, that protocol, right? It stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's a protocol that says here's how things should work when you're making HTTP requests. The different types of requests you can make, you can see in Postman. You can make a get, a post, a put. A patch is usually used for updating, actually. It's used for like partially updating data. And there's a bunch of other options that you can do. But the main ones that you need to worry about are get to get data from the server, post to put data on the server, put to update data on the server, patch to update like a small portion of data on the server, and then delete to delete something for it, right? So these are the main functionalities that every API will expose for each type of data, right? So if you're doing notes, you'll want to be able to get a note, post a note, put a note, or update it, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, mate. Yeah, nice one. It's just annoying they all start with a P. You know.
Yeah. And
It's hard to
along with
remember.
that, like built into HTTP, when we looked up status code 415, that's in HTTP, right? You can see you go to WebTech, HTTP, response status codes. If we go to response status codes, they're broken down for you based off of the standards, right? So 100 to 199 would be informational. 200 to 299 are successful. 300 are redirects, right? So like if we go to HTTP and it returns us a status code telling it's going to go to HTTPS. And then 400 to 500 would be client errors, right? So a 404 would be the page not found. A 415 is unsupported media type. So client errors are the client doing something wrong, right? Like we didn't send it the right data, so it said either we couldn't find the resource, you're not sending the right type of resource, those type of things. My most hated error is the server error 500, because like okay, let's say I don't know, we made a request to add a character and, there's a null reference exception in there and the server broke. The server would most traditionally return a 500 error saying, server error, something happened on the server side. It's not your fault, but something happened with the data that you sent.
So you don't get any more information than that, do you? It's kind of,
depending on the logging, like a good developer would add logging to tell the user what went on. But it's not,
okay,
it's not like a mandatory thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can look at post character for creating them, right? You can see it actually returns the character that it posts, right? It doesn't just like say, hey, it's a 200 action or status code, it worked. So it takes in a character, right? So it takes in JSON for the character, right? But you can see a character has an ID and a name. Well, we only pass it a name. The server, when you do, or the entity framework, when you try and you can see that it tries to get the ID for the character. It's generated for you, right? Like you don't want to handle the IDs. You don't want to make sure you're creating ones that haven't been used before. You want the entity framework to worry about that stuff for you. So you add the character to our list of characters. We save those changes asynchronously. That way we can do multiple of these requests at once, and then we return that action that happened, right? So if you hover over created at action, it returns a result that produces a status code 201. What is a status code 201? Let's go look it up. 201 is created. Oh, isn't that cool that it returns like isn't it cool that the ASP.NET team went through and made sure that their entire server generated code follows the HTTP guidelines? Because I've seen so many APIs not do this, and it bugs the heck out of me. But yeah, so it says it returns the action get character. So if we go back to posting and we send another one, I don't know, we'll add another E to Sabian. Well, the body of it returns the actual character, right? So if you hover over it, you can see the value of the object that we returned. You can see the route values and the action name. So if we go to the headers, we can see the date that it happened. We can see the content type of the thing that was returned. You can see the server that we're running on, Kestrel. Transfer encoding, that just says, it's sending as packets instead of like one big thing. And then you can see the location that item is now corresponding to. This is the last thing that we've added, the fourth thing that we've added, so it's at ID 4. And that's all sent in the headers of the HTTP request. Like if we went, can we save to a file? I want to just show you guys what a raw response looks like. I was hoping it would include the headers, damn. I don't know, wrapping your head around HTTP can kind of be a pain in the ass, because like basically what you're saying is like an HTTP request can include a body, cookies, headers, right? So the headers are just like extra data, right? So you can see there's 10 headers on default, but I only added 1. There's 9 of them hidden. So if I go open it up, you can see whether or not it has cache control, a token, the content type that would be generated for you, but I overwrote that. And then like the content length, for example, it's calculated when it's sent, right? So like it figures out the length of the content that you're sending, the host, the agent, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. Does everything that we've done so far make sense?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go look at the other two things that we got. We got delete character, and we got put character. So put character, it takes in an ID of a character and a character itself. So you can see the ID comes from the parameters that you pass in, right? So it's API/character/ whatever the ID is, and that's the first parameter. And then it takes in the actual character that you want to update itself, right? So it says, if the IDs aren't equal, return a bad request. A bad request is a 400, right? So it's saying, hey, you didn't pass in a character that matches that ID. This is just a bad request. Why did you send this to me? And these are really common to run into as you're setting up your first API. So then it says, Mr. Context, let's get an entity framework entry for this entity, right? So let's say let's get that character and let's set his state to modified, right? We're going to say this character is going to be modified. Then we try and save those changes that we just made. And if we run into any sort of exception, we say if the character at that ID doesn't exist, return a not found exception, which is a 404, right? Otherwise, throw some sort of error. And this is where you would make, the error codes better, right? And then just return no content, which would be a 204. Basically saying, hey, you did this thing. Like, I'm not going to return you anything because you updated it. If it didn't work, you would have gotten some sort of error, right? So on the front end side, if you didn't hit any sort of error and you get a 204 status code, that's how you know the thing worked, right? So now we can just create another request, and we'll call it update character instead of put, because update makes more sense. But the method it's going to be using is put, and we can just copy what we were using for post. And then we want to update something. So let's update number 2. So if we go to get characters, let's change the name Max, and we'll just add another X to it or something, right? So we want to, in the body, we're going to do raw again. Actually, we can't forget to add the headers. In the body, we're going to pass in the ID of Max, which is 2. And notice how this guy isn't surrounded in quotes because he's an integer. And then the name will change to Max with 2 X's instead of 1. So when we hit send,
How dare you?
you can see it didn't return anything, right? Because it just returned no content. If we go look at the headers of the request, it doesn't give us the 204. Interesting. I figured it. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Status is 204, right? And it shows you how long the request took. And now if we go do get characters, you can see that Max now has 2 X's, right? So we updated the guy at ID 2, right? Whereas let's pass something into an ID that doesn't match. Let's try that. So let's say we want to put at 3, but we want to update ID 2. So when we hit send, oh look, we get a 400 bad request, right? Because right here it says if the IDs aren't equal to each other, return a bad request. So the server's kind of making sure that you're sending the right data, right? Okay, now let's all right, since Max is unhappy, we'll delete him. So we're gonna delete one of them at an ID, right? So we're gonna delete ID 2 since Max is whining.
Wow.
Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Jeez.
All right, so all we have to do on the delete guy is change his HTTP header to delete. When we hit send, you can see it returns the thing that we deleted, right? It tries to find him. Otherwise, we return not found. It removes it from our context. We change that save to our context, and then we return the thing that we removed. So now if we go to get characters and we hit send, you can see ID2 no longer exists. And if we try and do like ID 55 and we hit send, we can see we get a 404 not found. Because if we can't find a character, right, we try and do a find. If the character is null, meaning we couldn't find one, return a not found, which is a 404. Boom! Isn't this stuff super simple and intuitive? Doesn't this just make so much sense?
Yeah, no, it's pretty straightforward to be fair. I was just surprised how much boilerplate there is at the start. It took you like no time to set it up. You know?
Yeah, it is. I am so happy
It
with
was
.NET
amazing.
Core 3.1. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's go get jiggy with it. Let's start adding to our model. Actually, Alex, Max, you got any questions? Is this making sense?
No, you're all good, mate. I think.
Yeah, you're good. I followed the other tutorial, so yeah, I'm good.
Cool. So let's add some stuff. Let's add what do we want to add? What sounds good? So we have our character name. Let's add strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, those things. So what a naive person would probably do would be to go in here and just add in a string for strength and so on, right? Well, what I want to do is I want to break those out into their own model. That way they're kind of wrapped, right? So like if you ever want to change the name of those things, we can do that. So we're going to go to new item and we're going to call it character stats. And the character stats is just going to hold integers, right? They're numbers, right? The strength is an integer. We need the get set again. And you can just do Control D to duplicate. So we got strength, dexterity, constitution. And wisdom. Wisdom and charisma. Okay, so we go back to our character and we're going to add character stats. Okay. So now we go try and run it. And we go get our characters. We're gonna get an issue, right? We're gonna say character stats requires a primary key to define. If you intended to use one, call has no key. Well, the problem is we're trying to get characters, but we stopped the application and restarted it, right? So none of those things exist anymore. So let's post a character. And you can see we're going to get an internal error again because we changed the core model, right? And you can see character stats is the problem. He doesn't have a primary key. Primary key meaning the ID, right? So we didn't in our character stats, we didn't say like character stats has an ID, right? Because character stats is going to be a table of its own. So we need to give him an ID. So if we imagine these as like Excel spreadsheets, we'd have our main Excel spreadsheet is a list of characters, right? And one of the columns is just going to be an ID that points to another Excel spreadsheet that points to the correct ID of that stat, of that collection of stats. And we have to rerun it because we made changes. And now if we go get our characters, haha, we get empty, right? Because, you know, it's empty. Okay, so now if we go get a post a character, and we hit send. ooh, character stats is automatically set to null for us. Isn't that cool? Because we didn't include it, right? So now what we can do is we can include character stats. Character stats. Also take note that the first even though in our even though in here we I forgot to capitalize. Properties in the C#, like if you can see there's let me stop this. You can see how these guys are underlined with the 3 dots. They can say that, oh look, it's a naming rule violation. Properties are supposed to, or public properties are supposed to be capitalized. But the integration with the entity framework automatically makes it so that when you're passing in the JSON, it lets you do it lowercase. Because this is kind of a C# syntax that nobody else really uses, the first letter being capitalized, whereas not every other, but like JavaScript or like a front end in Swift, like an iOS app, will do it all lowercase, which is kind of nice. So now we want to pass in the character stats, which is going to be an object of its own, so it needs the brackets. And so now we can say strength is 10. All right, so we just to make sure we're on the same page, we hit set. We send a get. It's empty. We post, and then we go get again. I did something wrong. You can see what it returned was it created me, and it said my ID was 1. It didn't set my strength correctly. So when we post a character, we add that character and save its changes. I have a feeling this is because character stats is its own table and we didn't save the changes to its table. So what I think we want to do here is we want to do underscore context dot. And see, this guy's only going to have characters, it's not going to have character stats. So we need to get a context that holds character stats, right? So the character context just uses a character as the thing that it's going to take care of, right? Whereas we want it to take care of the character stats as well. So what we need to do is add another context for our character stats. And this guy is going to do the exact same thing as this one. Oh, my copy paste is bad today. Okay. This is a new one for me. I have a sneaky suspicion that what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add okay, we're going to need to go to startup and register. Okay, so the only context we have is the character context right now. We Googled it. We are getting to the extent of my knowledge here.
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, is this Fabrice?
Yes, this is Fabrice.
Hi, Fabrice.
Did you add? How are you doing?
Good, buddy.
I'm a little late, so I
You're
missed
fine.
part of the stream. Yeah, I was asking, like, did you add a mapping for that? Because I think that would be a one to, is it a one-to-one relationship or one-to-many? One-to-many relationship, because one character. Is that what is it?
One character would have 1 stats, right? So it'd be a 1-to-1.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, did you map? Did you have a mapping for that?
How do you add the mapping? That's something I'm looking into that right now.
Should be a virtual property. Give me a second. Let me look into that.
Tutorial: create a more complex data model for an ASP.NET MVC app. Perfect. We can also get like super funky with it. Like we can limit the database so that it only it'll say like a name can have a max length of, I don't know, 50 characters, right? So like in the database, that column can only have 50 characters, right? So those are things that you're gonna want to think about when you're designing the architecture of your models. You can also change like the name of the column as well to something else like in the database itself if the model doesn't make sense. It does look like it needs to be virtual.
Yes, you would say the character, since the character has the stats, you would have a virtual stats
Yep.
in that character model, and then you'd have the same thing in the character stats.
Oh, the character stats would have a mapping backwards?
Yeah.
Would using character.character context work here?
In the model itself?
Mm-hmm.
You don't use any functionality in the model, it's just to hold the data. I mean, I guess you could. Like you could in like the get or the set or something.
Hold on, because it was in that astronomy project I was working on. Hold on, I'm gonna mute and I'll be right back.
Okay. We are.
Oh, can you just use...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, could you explain what the virtual keyword does here? What a virtual property is, you know?
Virtual as a. So usually you'd use virtual in like overwriting, right? So virtual, like if you had like a virtual function, if you have a subclass, the subclass can overwrite it, but it doesn't have to. It's like abstract in Java, but it can have an implementation, right?
Oh shit! Okay, yeah, no, I do remember this actually. We've covered this before. I thought it was ASP.NET, like a ad hoc thing, but it's not. Is it? It's just a general language feature.
Yeah, I'm assuming ASP.NET handles virtual for the mapping in the database, though. I'm assuming that is an ASP.NET specific thing.
Oh, okay. But still, the overriding. Yeah, I think I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, the logic I was trying to use. So what I was talking about is putting using character.character context under the system threading task, but it's the same. From what I understand, it's the same logic as the virtual class.
That seems to be correct. So also, by the way, all these, they're called annotations, and they come from the component model.data annotations. Fun fact. Okay, so from what this article says, it looks like virtual is used as a foreign key, right? Which is basically mapping from one table to another, right? Like if I'm a student and I want to if we're enrollment and we want to map to students, we'd have student IDs. So you'd use the ID of the student table as your foreign key, right? It's the key that maps to a foreign table, right? So now I'm just trying to figure out if this is all it takes to update it.
Yeah, from what I understand, like your character, you have your character stats inside that model, inside that character model. You're telling it, hey, I have this object, but it's its own table as well. You're gonna have to go look into that table to pull out the information for that object. And when you put the character virtual property inside of the character stats, it's telling it, hey, there's a character that's associated with this character's stat. Look at the ID and map them together.
Okay, still no update after adding virtual. I feel like I'm missing something in the context here. Also, we are beyond my knowledge in .NET. Like, my API knowledge is based off of Vapor, so this is gonna be a learning for all of us, which is fun. I think it's gonna be more fun on the stream as you guys catch up to me, that we kind of learn things together. It won't just be me teaching. We'll kind of get to have fun with this stuff.
Can you go over to characters controller? That's
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking like when you not put, but when you post it, you'll have to do like something in here.
So, hold on. I'm still processing here.
Wait. I think I found it. In the character context, in the
You have to include. You have to tell it to bring in
yeah.
all that information.
Okay, so it looks like there's a protected override. No. Override. Aha! Here's all the methods we can override from the database context. On model creating. Override this method to further configure the model. Come back. To further configure the model that was discovered by convention. Exposed in DB set. The resulting model may be cached and reused. So it looks like what they did here.
Yeah, you want to do that. Yeah, you want to do that on the creating. You're telling it, hey, you can change the name of the table there as well.
Oh.
But you're also telling it, hey, this is how I want this thing configured. This is what I want you to bring back.
Returns an object that can be used to configure the entity type. There we go. And the entity that we want to configure is the character stats. And we want to map that, right? Has 1. With 1. ID, right? Yeah, so here's what I'm looking at right here. It shows that's weird. So it uses, by the way, it uses the Fluent API, which is basically like it strings methods together to like perform operations on the database.
Another thing you can do is in your controller, when you're pulling the stuff from the context, since you can use link with that, you can tell it to include a specific property. So in your get method, where is it? Let's put. Can you move up to your get method?
Yeah, I did the stream just a little
Okay,
behind.
there we go. Yeah. Oh, okay, my bad. You should have an include with link, and with that you can tell it include and use a lambda telling it exactly what to include. So find async
Dot include.
ID dot include. I think the stream is behind, so okay. Is the include showing up?
No. I have link imported though. It looks like from this article that you sent, I need to add foreign key to the character stats itself.
Usually you need to do that, but with the way Entity Framework is right now, you don't have to. It should map that all by itself.
Oh. How old is this article?
So you should be able to just drop the include in there. So on the context, find the character
In the context or in the controller?
in the controller where you're using the context.
After find async, you should be able to use include.
Before that, so context characters dot include.
Oh, yep, I got it.
Yeah, and you can do a lambda there. If you use a lambda, you can do what is it? What are you gonna call it? Character C, whatever. Yeah, C dot character set.
Character dot set.
Yeah, that character set, whichever one you want to pull in, and you should get IntelliSense for that, don't you?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so whatever property you want to include, you should get that. Yeah, character sets. Then dot to list or something. Like you don't even need I don't think you need to set it to anything. Just dot character sets dot to list or
Oh, to list async. Yeah.
which to list async.
There we go.
And so what it's doing is saying pull up the character sets, navigate through the virtual properties, pull up the character sets from that. Character stats. I keep saying character stats for whatever reason. Pull up the character stats and include that as well in that whole package.
This is what it was.
That being said, though, yeah, too lazy. That being said, though,
oh, find async. That's what it was. Oh, this is get character, not get characters.
oh,
My bad. Oh, too many redos. Okay.
then you should ever include. Whoa, what happened?
I'm moving to this guy.
Okay, yeah. And you can pull up your include.
That's what we want. Sorry, you're like 20 seconds
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. For whatever reason. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that's on the get, but on the post, we still need to update the context with that.
On the it should still be the same thing on the post because when you're returning whatever you're returning, it should return that as well.
So what you're saying is after updating it in the get, it should work just fine.
It should, I think.
Let's try it. It's not going to get any more broken than it already is.
Hey, it's not broken. It's been a while, though. It's been a while.
I am just getting into the ASP.NET. It's been fun so far. Okay, when it's returning, it's not even returning the character stats filled in on the post, so something's not working correct. So we want to add the character and save those changes and return that action.
Okay, so you're adding the character, you're saving it, and it should give you the link to that character and return that character.
If it's 1-to-1, I probably need in the character stats a reference to my character, huh?
Oh yeah, you need that too. You need a virtual property to that because that's how it's gonna know how to map. Yeah, we were fine, right? We were fine.
Oops.
I think you misspelled character.
Shh. You saw nothing.
Yeah, I saw absolutely nothing, man. Hey, don't forget to capitalize your thing too.
Motherfucker.
Shh. I saw nothing.
Is there a setting to automatically close the console when your application ends, so you don't have to go to it and like click a button?
There should be the a round button next to, not a round, it's that circle arrow thingy next to the stop. It should just rerun the thing. Now you should get a circular dependency problem.
Yep.
That's because one of them is depending on the other one, which is depending on the other one.
Yeah. So you need to declare which one is the parent, basically.
In a sense, so what you end up having to do is map what you want to show. 1 second. Let me see if I can pull up an article for the mapping.
Could I just add the foreign key attribute?
You can try that, but I'm not exactly sure that that'll work.
Property character sets character is out of type character, which is not supported by the current database provider. Character is not supported by the current database provider? What? Oh, foreign key needs to be... That would make more sense. Okay, what about if we don't use the foreign key, but instead in the context, we do what we were gonna do?
You have to return a different resource, or else you're gonna end up each one calling the other one. So basically, your class that you return
His character.
is gonna end up, yeah, you're gonna have to return a different one. It's gonna be like a character resource. So what you're showing to the consumer is gonna be different from what you're actually storing on the database. So you'd have to create a different class for that.
A DTO.
Exactly.
That's kind of a pain in the ass.
Well, it's the same thing though. Like you're just gonna end up having another character class, a class that literally looks exactly like the character except without the virtual.
Do you have a pterodactyl living with you?
A what?
A pterodactyl?
No, I have a child.
I don't understand the difference.
Yeah, same thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
There's
Fair
a
enough.
different one.
I thought it was some sort of creature as well. I'm not gonna lie.
Max, how are you doing on what just happened?
What, these guys trying to troubleshoot?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was references to some stuff that I was. This sounds pretty alien to me, but
Same. Okay, I'm not alone. That's all I wanted to know.
no, indeed, mate. Yeah.
Hold on.
But yeah, up to this point, I was fine. But
let me give you a better example in SQL Server.
then it got kind of deep.
I'm sorry. Is this C#, or is this the SQL tutorial?
A little bit of both.
Oh, is this kind of like a PHP MyAdmin sort of thing?
Yep.
Oh no.
Like, yeah. I was going to ask about that actually. Yeah, is there some way of getting a more visual kind of, organizing the database and stuff?
Fucking Febreze.
Are you gonna create the DTO?
Oh, God damn it, I don't have a server set up. Okay, we're not using SSMS. I'm too lazy. Yeah, I'll create a DTO. Okay, this will make sense as soon as we're done with it. Just hold off until then.
Bear with the screaming children.
I'll try, I guess.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
No, you're good. I have 5 stepkids and one of my own, so I totally understand.
Let me stream in Discord so you can see what I'm doing live, Fabrice.
Yes, please.
I don't know how that'll affect the YouTube stream, but okay. I'm sorry, Fabrice, but I'm turning you down so that way the stream doesn't get screamed at. Oh, he left. He's like, hold on,
Yeah,
let me
that was
leave,
a
yell at
deal
my kids to
breaker,
be
I
quiet
think.
real quick, and then I'll be right back. So,
Yeah.
what he was asking me to do was create a DTO, which stands for Data Transfer Object. So basically what it is it's like a model that you're only using to transfer data, right? So like, I wouldn't include the ID of the model as I'm transferring it. I just give you the name and his stats, right? Does that make sense?
Wait, so what do you send? What do you not include? I kind of missed that, to be honest.
Oh, so in the DTO, the data transfer object, I'm not including the ID and I'm not including virtual, right? Because I just want to hold a direct reference to the character stats that this guy holds, and I just want the data that the user cares about, right? Like, if I were to be making a D&D app, if I were to try and serve up this page, I don't care what the ID of that thing is on the front end. All I care about is what the data is inside of it, right? Does that make sense?
Right, yeah, I got it. Yeah, sure.
So you use data transfer objects, so that way you transfer over only the data that you want.
What if they want to get like all the data though, or like multiple records? If they're not actually indexed, how does it actually send it? Or is it only ever one like piece of the data?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, no, I didn't phrase that at all well. I was just thinking for here we're only transferring one character, right? But if we wanted to transfer like a whole set of characters or like all the characters, would that be possible? Like without them being indexed, or?
That's what get characters does. It returns all of them.
Right. Okay. So what we don't need one for that.
Are you asking about like when you'd use the DTO?
Kind of, yeah. Well, I'm almost like kind of wondering why we need one right now. Like, what is the problem it actually fixes in this case?
So there's a couple ways we can solve the problem, right? So the problem is that when we're trying to create or get characters, it's just returning a character, right? It's just returning the table characters, right? But the characters table holds a reference to another table called character stats, right? We need to reach into that table.
Oh no.
That's an easy mute.
No.
Fabrice, private message me in Discord when you fix your microphone and I'll unmute you. That hurt.
That's
Cool. I'm scarred for life. It's like something out of a horror movie.
What if we just give the user like a specific amount of attribute points and then ask them what they want to put their points into as far as their character goes.
Well, you got to think, this is just the API. We're not making a front end, right?
That's fair, yeah.
If we wanted to make a front end, yes, that's something that we could definitely do.
Another time.
I don't like front end.
But I mean, just like right now, we're just. What is happening? Oh, that's my question. Never mind. I'm going on mute again.
Okay, so here's we're going to ignore what Fabrice said, and we're going to do it the way that every other article that I'm finding online tells me to do things. So on model creating, we have our model builder, right? So we're going to call the base and pass in the model builder. I have no idea what it does, but we're assuming that it's required. We're going to tell the builder that the entity that we want is character stats, and it should map to the table. Does it take a string? It takes a string. Oh my goodness, that's ugly. Character. Hold up, give me just a second. So if we were lazy, we could have avoided this whole thing by just putting all of the stats in the character itself, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
We wouldn't be running into this problem because there'd just be more variables in here, just like name. But I was trying to go about this the right way, and I did not research enough. Hee.
Yeah, indeed. I was just confused why that model couldn't just be sent. Yeah.
Does it make more sense now that like it has to reach into a different table to grab that stats?
It does, yeah, indeed, yeah.
Like what's like all this stuff is handled for us under the hood, so it's kind of hard to show you without looking at the database itself. But like each one of these
Yeah,
models that
no,
we're
indeed.
creating, gets a table on the SQL server.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Oh, he's good now. Hold on, let me unmute him.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Killing everybody?
Mhm.
Okay, sorry about that.
You're good.
Okay, so in your controller then, what you would return is your DTO as opposed to your actual character class.
Right now it's just returning the actual character itself, so I just create a new DTO and return it.
Yeah, you would return a DTO. The only problem with that though is you kind of have to map that.
Yeah, I think it's easier just to go into the actual like. There's got to be that just seems like such an ugly way to do it, you know. Whereas like what I'm looking at here looks like you can actually just map it when the model's being created, and you map it like both ways. So you see the category holds, or, well, in our case, a character holds a character stats, and a character stats hold a character.
I think that's to avoid doing the whole virtual properties. That's telling it, hey, this is the relationship.
When they created the fields. This is so long. Oh yeah, they didn't do virtual. Fuck.
Yeah, it's for the virtual. This is why you would have to use something like AutoMapper to automatically map that for you, or else you can end up having to create a new one, a new DTO, and then filling it in.
Okay, so they're using virtual here, saying a student has multiple enrollments, and an enrollment has one student. So they use virtual. So we know we're on the right track here. So, okay, that's just updating the entity. So this is creating all the entities, but we want to do, yeah, we want to add to the database context. So when the model's being created, what the fuck does that do?
Oh, it's the pluralizing table name convention. It's, you know, when you create a table of characters, the table itself shows up as characters because it has, well, a bunch of characters. When you remove
Oh,
that, your table is just character table now.
got it. Okay, so it's good to add this, so we don't have to worry about the pluralization.
Yep.
Okay, so in our context, they're not using the base, so I guess we won't. We'll follow what they're doing. It doesn't have conventions. Is this an older version? Microsoft, are you betraying me?
Can
It
you go
was
back to the page again?
it was made in January 2019. This is the only part I don't like about the ASP.NET Core. It feels like there's a billion ways to do everything.
Well, it's because it's all, you got a bunch of mix up with stuff that's not core as well too.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, you should do it this way. And it's like, no, you should do it that way. You know how C#
Yeah.
people are.
Serialization and model binding? No. (2014). Okay, not the right version. Which? Hold on.
Oh, that's because you're in ASP.NET 4 point something.
Oh.
It's not core.
ASP.NET. Okay, where is core? .NET Core CLI. .NET Core, haha. .NET Core. Create a web API. There we go. This is the page that I wanted. Okay. So this is the page that I was looking at, but this one didn't show. Okay, ASP.NET Core
Oh, because
3.1.
it didn't have the other table, right?
Yeah, this one just had one table, yeah.
What that is doing though, it's, you have different ways you can set up Entity Framework to tell it what the relationships are. You can either do it in the model class itself, or you can do it when you're creating that context.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
one of them uses virtual, the other one doesn't. But essentially, what the problem that we're going into is when you have a character, you're getting a character stat, and the character stat is getting a character, it's getting character stat, and so you just get into that circular dependency. So you have to break that, and that's why you have to introduce the mapping with the DTO. If you were using something like AutoMapper, for example, you would set your custom mapping saying, hey, this is what part of character I want, and this is what I want to show to the user, and you'd have it map it by itself. But if you're not using AutoMapper, you end up having to do that by hand.
So we should use AutoMapper in that case then.
Yes, but at the same time, what happens is it's going to introduce a whole layer of more stuff.
Which is handled
Like,
in the context, right?
yes, that's what I'm saying though. It's like the complexity we're introducing right now in the stream. So let's make sure it works by hand, and then
I see what you're saying. I got you.
and then we can do the AutoMap.
Okay. So in the controller, when we are returning a character, we're just going to return a new character DTO.
Yeah, and you have to set everything inside of that DTO.
That makes sense. So we're just going to say his name is equal to whatever the character that we passed in name, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That name.
And the character
Character
stats.
stat, which we end up. Did we name it character stats? Oh. Oh yeah. It's an object. My bad.
Mm-hmm. Like that? That seems too easy. Oh, we make a character stats DTO too, don't we?
We shouldn't need to.
It does not have a constructor because I'm a dumbass. That's all we needed. No, that
And
seems
that should return.
too easy.
The only problem though is, well, it's not exactly a problem. It's just what you're returning as opposed to what you say you're returning are two different things. So you'd have to change your return statement, your action result, instead of character to a character DTO. Ah, you missed that circular button thingy to restart it. It's
It's
next
been
to
behaving weird.
Oh,
I was trying to do it and it was behaving weird earlier, so I just stopped. Okay,
did it give the same thing again?
child dependent side could not be
Well, that must mean we have to
configure
end
the
up with.
foreign key.
You couldn't configure a foreign key.
Yeah, it says configure the foreign key property.
Do you have a foreign key on the
I didn't add like the attribute, no. I thought we were trying to avoid that.
You shouldn't have to add the attribute. This is a whole deal.
Hmm.
Oh. Do you have an ID for
Character
No, that
stats?
doesn't make any sense. No, that doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
character stats
What
has
do
an
you
ID
need
too.
that? I was gonna say, do you have that foreign key there? Character stats ID in your character.
I thought you wanted a reference to the actual object, not its ID.
Yeah, there's the thing. You shouldn't have to do that.
Oh, you shouldn't have to have a reference to the actual object?
You shouldn't have a reference to the actual ID.
Oh, okay. So what I have right now makes sense.
I mean, I guess you can always use the what do you call it, what do you call these things? The attributes, right? You could always mark the foreign key.
I think I tried that and it didn't work.
And character stats?
Don't you want the character to have a foreign key to character stats?
No, in character stats.
Other way around.
Yeah, other way around. Yeah,
Has the
on that
foreign
ID,
key.
on the ID,
Oh.
on its ID. Yeah, because that's the ID is a foreign key, and it references the character.
Wait, no,
The
the
yeah,
character stats has
character.
an ID of its own. That doesn't make sense.
No, the character stats ID is the foreign key.
Oh, dude, sequel.
Yeah.
Hurting my brain.
So, foreign key, in your quotes, you should have it referencing the what is it, character table?
Yeah.
Or whatever it was called, character or characters.
In the context, I'm putting back in the oh, I don't have the remove pluralization thing on the jig. So it'll be characters. Question mark. I wish I shouldn't have done it in memory. I should have put it in SQL itself.
Yeah, that way you could have. Yeah, that way you could have seen it.
I haven't gotten that far yet. That'll be for next stream. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna end the stream and I'm gonna work on this without looking like an absolute dumbass like I have for the last 45 minutes.
In the stream, I'll stay here, right?
What's that?
I wanna figure out this thing.
Oh, yeah.
Why this thing isn't working. So yeah, let's.
But yeah, for the next stream, we will have this figured out. Thanks for watching.